so much shorter than he is. Okay. To continue our work this morning, I would like to introduce Dr. Stephanie Marshall. As an assistant professor of science education, Dr. Marshall brings a wealth of expertise and dedication to addressing those systemic barriers in science education. Dr. Marshall's research examines organizational and system-level questions, considering how policies and decisions surrounding science and STEM education impact the experiences of marginalized youth. Drawing on her rich background as both a middle and high school science teacher, she possesses a unique perspective that informs her research and practice. As we reflect on what we've just heard from Dr. Burgess, let us be inspired by Dr. Marshall's leadership as she invites us to shape our visions in our individual contexts. I am so grateful for her being here today, and please welcome Dr. Stephanie Marshall.
Thank you so much, Cory. I must also start my time. First, it's a privilege to speak after Terrence, Dr. Burgess. But I want us to really engage his questions. So he left us with some really important questions because y'all are here, right? Y'all prioritize this. But oftentimes, y'all don't get the space. I know y'all are busy. Principals, y'all are school leaders, but y'all don't necessarily get the space to really reflect on what do you need next. And so I want to really offer that time right now. So I want to give you 5 minutes to actually engage the questions that Dr. Burgess just left us with. And so the questions that he posed are, what is your vision for equitable science teaching and learning within your respective roles? Why this vision? And then what do you need to successfully enact this vision? So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. So please take out your notebooks. The mat that you have, please take some notes. And then this will also drive what we're going to be doing next. Thank you. Some of you have already started this. If you haven't already, please start. Can I have a moment, please? Thank you. Some of us are together. Okay. So some of you have already started doing this. I hear a little bit over here. Can I have your attention, please? Okay. So some of you have already started this, but please start sharing at your table. Take a couple minutes, and you may get some ideas from other people about their vision. So share a little bit at your table. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, so maybe not the full table. Share with your neighbor so you have enough time. Okay, waterfall, waterfall. Shh. That worked so much better. Okay, so I want you to hold on to your conversations that you just had. And so I'm going to talk a little bit now and then at the end. So I'm going to talk about setting a vision and identifying your science network first. If you've heard me speak before, I like to start with a story. And so I was in grad school when one of my friends asked me to serve on a panel. Again, I was in grad school. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life yet, but I was serving on this panel with all these folks who were business owners and had they knew what they were doing. And so I was serving on this panel for some students from Flint. We were in Detroit at the time, and they had just done a tour in Detroit. And when I was serving on this panel, I didn't really get any questions from any of the students. I don't know if they knew what to do with me. I was still in school and they were in school. Like, what do they ask me? And at the very end, I received a question, and I call this young girl, Faith. And she asked me, how did you know you could do science? And that question has stuck with me because it made me really pause and think about, how did I know I could do science? But I had to recognize that it wasn't actually from school. My mom was a Detroit public school educator. She told me I could do science. My dad told me I can do science. They bought me this little red microscope when I was a kid, and really now I know it really wasn't a microscope. It just like blew things up. It made them bigger. But it let me know all these signals that told me that I could do science. I was a young astronaut in Southfield Public Schools. Anyone from Southfield? Okay. So there were all these signals that told me I could do science, but it wasn't school necessarily. So what I had to recognize is that young girl, folks had made decisions that told Faith that she couldn't do science. And so that's why y'all are so important. So the decisions that we make from day to day for all youth, the youth like Faith, make a difference, because she was in high school and didn't know that she could do science. And it also made me recognize the privilege of being able to know that I could do science. That's something I really hadn't considered at that point. So that's what drives my work and my research of working with folks to make better decisions for kids. So most of my work lies outside of the classroom, because we have to make better decisions outside of the classroom, because we've heard about decisions for instructional materials, we've heard about time. A lot of these decisions are made by leaders, and they need to be on board, and a team needs to be on board to mobilize the vision that y'all are envisioning right now. So really, we can't do this work alone. And so I have this worksheet, like if you scan the QR code, but really you can just jot down some notes, because you have a vision, but then I want you to think about, what does this look like, sound like, and feel like for youth, educators, and the community? Because there are these multiple layers of folks that are involved. Because if we're not actually meeting the needs of the community, as we heard from Dr. Burgess, like what is the purpose of science? What are we doing? And so I want you to take some time. So take your vision and now think about, what does that look like, sound like, and feel like for youth, educators, and the community? And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Okay, when you're ready, please start sharing. If you haven't already done so, start sharing with your members at your table. Okay, waterfall, waterfall. Okay. So I want you to hold on to that vision. And then when I come back up here, we're going to think a bit more about, does this vision currently align with your organization? And then who needs to be on board to achieve your organization's science vision? So again, we're going to hold on to that, and we're going to come back at the end. Okay. So I have the job of closing us out. I know it's been a long day. So please feel free to get up and stretch as you need to. So I recognize the struggle. So I want to start off with, I went around and read all the sticky notes. And I wanted to put up a couple of them specifically. How do we instill the importance of science in elementary to all stakeholders? Another question, how can I convince other staff of the importance and how science is able to persist across the subject areas? And so I've heard a lot of amazing things today around, like, you can apply for grants and you need a curriculum and all these things that you need, but you also need people on board committed to this vision, right? Like, you can't have this vision by yourself. So you can be the holder of the vision, but you also need to support folks in being on board. So I'm gonna give you, I am a researcher. I'm gonna give you a little background, and then I'm going to give you some space to operationalize, or plan to start to operationalize this. And so I'm gonna start with the definition of an infrastructure. I'm drawing from Phil Bell's work, who says an infrastructure consists of the substrates or parts that require organized practices appropriate for policy adoption and successful implementation. So I have a biology background, so stay with me for a second. So the infrastructure has these substrates, right? So we see the substrates, and it's assumed that substrates, you just put the curriculum, the people together, and stuff just happens. That's how sometimes we're treated, right? But we know that that's not enough. That's not sufficient. So I don't know the password. Cancel. Thank you all. But we know that when we put a substrate and it binds to an active site of an enzyme, it causes a reaction to happen. And it brings the activation level down, right? So we need some things in our work to bring the activation level now down so that a reaction can happen. Y'all following me? Okay, cool. So as we talk about infrastructures, it leaves out the humanness or the people that are involved, because y'all are the people, and there are people within these infrastructures. We can't just put these pieces together and assume something's going to happen. And so human infrastructures, we think about healthcare, childcare, education. But when we think about equity-centered human infrastructures, we have to also consider the relationships. I've heard that today. We also have to consider the decision-making, because people are making decisions that lead to what we see in the classrooms, required for organized practices appropriate for policy adoption, and successful and equitable implementation. So even how are we defining success? I'm defining it as equitable. And we heard from Dr. Burgess around what does equity actually mean. So who do you need, so my question for you all, who do you need to bring on board to mobilize your science vision? Because again, we can't do it alone. You're connected to all these people, and I've heard a lot about great resources today. We just heard about like the MySTEM network, all these other things that are going on, and that can also be overwhelming, right? But we also need to be strategic in that. So you fit into this network in a specific way. We're all connected in specific ways. And so what I want you to do next is you have the vision. I told you to hold on to it. You had the vision that you created earlier, right? You wrote that down. Now I want you to, on your notes, I want you to draw out your network that's going to support this vision. That could be individuals, that can be different groups, teachers, organizations. Who are you connected to? So I want to take about 5-6 minutes to do that. So map it out, and then I'm going to give you, we're going to scaffold. I'm going to give you something else to do next. So take about 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, waterfall, waterfall. Shh. So next, I can't walk away from that. So next, I want you to share out who are some, I want you to name some of the stakeholders, and it could be, maybe it's not their name, it may be their role or responsibilities. So I want you to each take one turn at your table, and I'll give you a couple minutes, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Okay, waterfall, waterfall. Shh. Okay, I want us to share out a few of those stakeholders that you shared at your table. Maybe there are some that you didn't think about, especially those. Who wants to share? Somebody?
Students,
Students. Who else? Thank you. Families? What else? Who else? Grant writers. Heard a lot of affirmation. Who else? teachers,
Your community.
community, I don't, okay. Who else? Administrators, I think some in the room. Who else? Board of Education. Yes, +1.
Policymakers. That's what I was going to say, policymakers, because I have a few friends that work in Lansing, and I was just thinking like, so those, yeah.
So my background's in ed policy, so I appreciate that. So when we think about the politics and policies of the work that we're doing, those folks need to be on board too. Because they're making decisions that impact all of us in this room, right? So how do we also bring those folks on board? Did I miss any? I'm sure I did, but I'm gonna pause there. So to continue, you may be wondering how. How do we do this? How do we bring the activation level down? And I'm proposing one means is storytelling. So storytelling, and remember I started with a story, right? So an African, I hear some. I'll be done real soon. An African storyteller is also known as the griot, has been described as having one main goal: to teach people to know themselves. We also draw on intergenerational stories that have sustained the histories of African descendants, culture, and knowledges. Storytelling has found a home in education through critical race theory, developed out of legal studies. Lamar Johnson talks about, moves the conversation to value stories in themselves as means to serve as a means of power, freedom, and self-actualization. So something happens when we tell our stories. Storytelling specifically with teachers has a potential to serve as a means to empower teachers and the communities they serve. However, in tension with the potential of storytelling, many pre-service teachers and in-service teachers have been raised by majoritarian stories, which are the stories that carry assumptions that persons in positions of racialized privilege bring with them to discussions of racism, sexism, classism, and other forms of subordination. So why this matters is our lens frames our stories. And so sometimes we also have to be really self-reflective about what we need to know in order to represent or even advocate for the students that we're working for and the communities we're working for. And so earlier when I told that story, I had a plot, I had a setting. I told you all these different details about the characters, the point of view was my perspective. I told you about a conflict. How often do we go to an administrator or someone that we need help from and we don't give them all the details? We give them like very surface level information and they don't really understand the urgency. And so I've been working with them, had the opportunity to work with the MySTEM network. And some of the people I've talked to have used the comparison of it. Sometimes it feels like I'm falling off a cliff. That's really morbid, right? But in someone's day-to-day experiences, they're saying the comparison in a way where they're saying, if I fell off a cliff, I don't know if this STEM program will run tomorrow. And so we're in an urgent state, and we heard that from Dr. Burgess earlier. We're in an urgent state where we need a community on board to do this work collectively, because it's not just if someone leaves. We're literally hearing this. When one person leaves, everything is disrupted. And so we need to bring that activation level down. We need to get other people on board to work towards the same vision. And so I have I'm gonna focus on one school. And because this data actually comes out of the MySTEM network, and so my other hat, I'm also working as a consultant with the MySTEM network. So all of these case studies are gonna be on the website. So Megan already referenced the playbooks. And part of the playbooks, what we're hearing from some of the MySTEM network members is that folks get to see themselves in those resources. And so what's really important is for you to have like this background about this high school. And I can say, because we're amongst friends here, and this will be public information, this is actually out of Flint. So I told a story about Flint earlier, and I was asked to give you some, I guess, inspiring words. But when I was thinking about it, what's really inspiring is that folks are doing the work in this room. And like, so y'all are engaged in this, and I told a story about a young girl from Flint earlier, and now I'm telling you about what they're doing right now. And so I have the demographics up here. So the mission to develop a community of learners prepared to live, work, and contribute to an ever-changing society. The vision that scholars are involved in real-life experiences essential to developing global mindsets and exemplify skills in creative problem-solving, critical thinking, collaboration, cooperation, communication with a community orientation, a lot of C's. Other information, the district follows a whole child tenet and works to actively engage learners through connections to the school and community. They've been having some challenges. They talked about high level of teacher turnover. They have new teachers, and we heard about this earlier, new teachers that have minimal experience with place-based education, and that's really what they had adopted. Although there are several passionate teachers, leaders, that are really centered around equity-driven and place-based education, they're concerned about how to get others on board. So to give you a little background, these folks were invited to a conference that was a place-based education conference that was taking place here in Michigan, and they were asked, can you give folks from all over the world a tour of your school? And so they gave that tour, and they said, wait a minute, we gave the tour of our school to these folks who aren't at our school, and we've never done this for the people who are here. So the SIG coordinator said, because we had to take time and tell our story to these people, we realized the biggest problem was we weren't telling our story about what was going on in the building to the staff. We literally redid the tour on the informational session that we did for all those people who came from all over the world. We did it for our staff, and I think that was a hook and a turning point because they were like, wow, we see the ducks. Yeah, we see the vertipool. Yeah, we know something's going on. So if folks in your building don't know your why, how can they be on board? So I have a Midwestern elementary principal, but this is actually Principal Lee, who is here. He said, if you don't tell your story, somebody's going to tell it for you. And they're probably going to tell you the story that they remember. The businesses and nonprofits that are supporting the school know what's happening because they're working with us. They don't hear it on the news or in the newspaper. I think that's significant. It also helps bridge the gap between the school and community to support one another. And the community members have that relationship. They have that partnership. When they have the knowledge of what you're going to do with the bond, they're probably more apt to support whatever that would be. So we're talking a lot about the stories that happen inside the school, but we also need to think of beyond the walls of the school. We need to get other folks on board, the community, because they vote, right? We heard about the power of bonds earlier when we heard from Lake Orion, right? Lamar Johnson also said, I also heard the vulnerability from Dr. Green earlier. And so Lamar Johnson says, Dr. Lamar Johnson, when these memories resurface, when we tell our stories, scholars of color re-enter these experiences. Re-entering these moments requires a deep level of vulnerability. Therefore, as educators, we have to be willing to own our feelings, particularly because we operate in a world where white rationality, patriarchy, and Western thought illustrate emotions as a sign of weakness and portray our emotions are detached from our truth, reasoning, body, mind, and soul. And so it may be a vulnerable place to actually say, you know, I need help. I need support. But if you also provide the details like the plot, the setting, like what are the details that can actually support someone and actually saying, you know, this is what my everyday looks like. This is what, and this is why I need X, Y, and Z. It's not just because sometimes folks don't see your need and they can't see your same need in the same way. So how can you communicate that? So now it's your turn. I told a story earlier, But I want you to spend some time, you just mapped out your network. What is one thing that you need to do next? Who do you need to contact? Who do you need to be in conversation with? And what story do you need to talk to them about? So a way to get to this story is to think about what is a barrier that you're currently facing. Who has authority to counter that barrier? Who will or can support you with that barrier? What do they need to understand? So when you identify the what do they need to understand, then what story will support their understanding? And then I want you to rehearse your story. So we don't have a lot of time. So I'm gonna give you a couple minutes, and then maybe one person at the table can share what's a story you're thinking about that you can share that kind of will resonate, but also communicate what you need to advocate for elementary science education. So take a few minutes, and I'll go around and I'll do waterfall and stop you in a few minutes. Okay, waterfall, waterfall. Shh. And so, answering the call, what next steps do you need to, well, first I should say, I hope you found it useful to like actually spend time, like what stories do you need to tell? And actually recognizing that sometimes we need to like spend time bringing people on board to what we're doing and what we're trying to mobilize towards. So what next steps do you need to take to realize the vision? Another question, when will you meet with your team? If they're not here, if they're not here, when will you meet with them? And then again, if they are here, who else can support your vision? I hope you've been able to identify that. And then we also talked about communicating your vision. And so my closing thoughts, your science vision matters. Mobilize others to work alongside you towards a shared vision. Our stories and the stories of our youth can offer a new perspective so that we can move towards systemic transformation. I just added this in. Kate McNeil and colleagues have this book, The Instructional Leader's Guide to Implementing K-8 Science Practices. So I teach secondary methods, and one thing I've shared with them is some of the observation protocols out of this text so that they can be empowered and they can take that to a principal and say, hey, can you use this to observe me? And so to have these tools is really important. So I saw people taking a picture, okay. So feel free to contact me if you ever have any questions. It's been a pleasure to engage with you all today.